intrigued by your mind. I'm intrigued by your looks. I'm intrigued and beguiled. I gone and read all your books.
Hi, and welcome to this episode of Mind the Future, and I'm your host, Catherine Brodsky. Now, for a podcast that's all about the future, it is only appropriate that my guest today is Futurist Nikolas Badminton. He is a world-renowned keynote speaker, consultant, and media producer that shows you the future trends that shape impactful organizations, trillion-dollar companies, progressive governments, and $200+ billion investment funds. Nikolas will shift your mindset from what is to what if, and hopefully it will lead into brighter futures. Now, Nikolas has also advised Robert Downey Jr.'s team for the Age of AI documentary series and was featured in Smart Drugs, A Futurist Journey into Biohacking, which is a topic that we're going to be tackling today. His research and opinions were also featured in BBC, Vice, The Atlantic, Fast Company, TechCrunch, Business Insider, Forbes, and lots of other media outlets. Nikolas is also the founder of Dark Futures, a popular series of TED-style talks in Vancouver, Toronto, and San Francisco that focuses on the darker side of the future and the hidden systems that affect our lives.
So thank you so much for joining me today, Nikolas.
It's good to be here, and you're an alumni of Dark Futures, so thank you for that. And yeah, we've had something like 32 speakers over 5 or 6 years, and it's very exciting. Not sure what we're going to do this year. Going to try and do something in person and maybe live stream it. So
yeah, there seems to be no shortage of topics, dark topics to tackle, especially now, but kind of always.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm talking about black elephants right now, which are like black swan events. For me, a black swan event is something that comes out of nowhere. We didn't expect it. It causes calamity. It could be, the big one, the earthquake on the West Coast, could be a meteor like destroying New York City. But in this case, It's a pandemic. This has been happening year in, year out for hundreds of years. And it's just been stood in the corner of the room. That elephant's been looking at us and telling us that it's coming to get us. And we never believed it. We never prepared for it. And now look, trillions of dollars have been wiped off of markets and businesses have been shut down. Lives have been irreparably sort of broken. Opportunities being realized. And now we're in a world that's trying to repair itself, right?
It's interesting too, because I noticed that the number one film when the pandemic broke out was, what was it? It was a pandemic themed film, basically predicting most everything, including the shortages we're going to experience.
Yeah.
Although I don't know if people predicted toilet paper per se.
And bicycles. You try and buy a bicycle in North America right now, it's almost impossible.
Oh, damn, I didn't know that. Now I was on the market for one, so I guess I can't.
Yeah, you're good if you want to spend $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $10,000+ on a bike, but spending less than
outside
that,
my budget.
Yeah, everything else is gone.
All right. So, I'm recalling when we first met, and I remember you kind of revealed to me that you are part cyborg. You kind of explained to me what that was.
So I've been following sort of cyberpunk culture. I've been involved in the internet since the very early 90s. VR, started following that a long time ago. The subculture. A lot of these different, hacker subcultures, cypherpunks, all the way through to the early doors of the internet. And part of that was a movement that sort of sprung up, I think, in the early 2000s around biohacking, that idea that we can add technology to our bodies to change how we operate. And at a conference, I think it was around about 2014, I ran called From Now. A good friend of mine, Emil Grafster, who runs a company called Dangerous Things. And he was microchipping himself with RFID chips in his hands and wherever, so that he could control doors and locks and contain passwords and links to all sorts of things. And it intrigued me. He turned up to a conference of mine called Cyborg Camp back in 2013 that was just talking about the internet and humanity and how the two were interacting. The following year, he came and he implanted my left hand. with a microchip just here on stage. And it was like, whoa, like, and they got covered in a bunch of magazines like Vice and whatever. Subsequently, about 3 or 4 years after that, it got covered nationally in Canada, and it's been sort of taken all over the world as a discussion point about what happens when we meld technology with humans. Now, the chip that I've got in my hand, which is quite controversial to some and quite normal for others, it doesn't do much. I did it as a bit of a showpiece for the conference. Emil wouldn't come and talk about biohacking unless I let him doing an implant on stage. And I was like, well, if you look at the liabilities at a conference, I'm not going to be on the hook if someone else, gets infected or whatever. Even though it's pretty safe, you just don't know. So I was like, I put my hand up, put my hand out, and then he implanted me. And I'll share the link with you so you can share it with your viewers as well. And it's interesting when you start to think about, okay, I can use an RFID writer, a cell phone that's got open RFID or NFC. I can write, a small amount of information, a URL, maybe a small cipher to this chip that suddenly, my hand has become a hard drive, or it's become a key. For a while, when I had an apartment in Vancouver, I had an RFID door lock that I used to open with my hand. So, these things, trying to think about how technology can meld with us as humans is something that I've followed for a very long time. And that's gone beyond into things like smart drugs and starting to talk to people about how they've used psychedelics, how you use fitness, how you use cold water therapy, and a whole bunch of different things that I played with as part of this documentary, Smart Drugs, that was on CBC and now is on Amazon Prime and Google Play, and it's all over the world.
Right. Well, given how much we already rely on our phones and on all the tech that we are surrounded by, and those AirPods and all that, can it be argued that we are kind of cyborgs already?
Yeah, absolutely we are. Here we are on the internet. I've got a webcam, and I'm sort of connecting with you across Canada. I've got these earplugs in, and all of these are peripherals. I think that these peripherals make us human 2.0. These are upgrades, the early days of the Aqualung, or, being able to turn weapons from stones into weapons that fire, all the way through to the mobile devices, the wearables that we have, the quantified self. All of this has meant that we are cyborgs. And the first conference I did back in 2013 was with Amber Case. And she's got a very famous TED Talk called We're All Cyborgs Now. But that access to information, everything from the cell phones to the iPads, the mouse in my other hand or whatever, all of these are peripheries. I mean, what I've actually got in my hand is what I call human 3.0, which is like embedded technology integrated with biology. And a step further with that would be like brain implants and whatever. But it's super interesting as we think about human 1.0, we're born with a platform. I believe we can upgrade that. And I think human 1.0, the simple upgrades that keep us more cognizant and aware at that level are the spiritual platforms. And this can be anything from like breath work to taking plant-based medicines, all the way through to meditation and whatever. Human 2.0 is that technology that we pick up with our hands or we wear, and human 3.0 is that integration. We're not really there with 3.0 right now, but human 2.0, the fourth industrial revolution, and our sort of acceleration across transportation, communications, and energy, it's in full swing. And it's an interesting world that we live in.
Well, Elon Musk and others have argued that maybe humans need to become cyborgs in order to survive, especially, I think he sees AI as a bit of a threat, especially if singularity is in fact possible. And, do you think that those who don't adapt will be left behind? And what do you think our human cyborg sort of blend will look like about, 20 years into the future?
Yeah, I mean, who would have thought 20 years ago that 6 billion people around the world would have access to mobile communication technology? The world's getting smaller just through that kind of technology, right? The next level, it's the ability to improve your health or your mobility, your accessibility, and that's everything from like glasses to walking sticks to wheelchairs to powered knee braces to a whole bunch of prosthetic limbs to whatever. And when it actually starts having more advanced technology that costs more money, the majority of the population doesn't get access to the stuff that they really, really need. There's still lots of rudimentary technologies that are being used by people to fill in that gap between who they are and what they need to do on a daily basis. But, you know, there is a gap growing when we start to think about the dangers of artificial intelligence, human-machine symbiosis and all those things. You know, I kind of feel that the singularity is a little outdated. You know, it comes from like Kurzweil et al., you know, talking about, you know, that point in the sort of not too distant future, you know, 2042, 2046, 2050, when eventually, you know, we'll have biology and humans sort of working together seamlessly, data being passed into our brains so that, you know, we no longer have to have a memory that stores everything that we need to operate. We can just tap into things. This is almost like a matrix-like ability in a way, except for not being in a simulation. But then that's another discussion as well. Are we in a simulation or not? But if we come back to transhumanism, if we come back to human 1.0, human 2.0, a lot of that is accessible to pretty much everyone in the world. And in countries where there's a more socialist system of healthcare and access, then a lot of people are being looked after. But when we're actually starting to move into new territories and we're looking at this new frontier tech, these are the experimenters, these are the true biohackers. The people play with wetware, you know, our body, you know, even our genetics to try and become something more than we've tried to be to this point.
And, you know, there's this whole boom suddenly, this big interest in biohacking and nootropics. Can you give us a little bit of a Cole's notes on those, and also sort of why do you think it came about? You know, I think it's a relatively recent in terms of that much interest in it.
Yeah, so it's actually come from way back in the 50s and 60s, and even when you'd have astronauts and cosmonauts going into space, they'd be leaning into piracetam and phenylpiracetam and things like that. I took phenylpiracetam as part of the Smart Drugs documentary, and it was like rocket fuel. It just released all the potential energy in my body. I was wiped out at the end, but it was really interesting. If you watch the documentary, there's a lot of energy going on in my body and a very uplifted mood, a lot of power when I exercised and whatever. You know, these nootropics have been around for a long time, but really in the past, I think, sort of 10 to 15 years, nootropics, the idea of biohacking and smart drugs, as they're also known, have become more popular. And it's because there's been brands like Onnit's Alpha Brain, people like Joe Rogan, a bunch of other people starting the conversations about these and the accessibility of them as well. Phenylpiracetam, you can't get it in places like the UK, but you can get it in Canada, you can get it in the US, so that's okay. I first came across one product, Alpha Brain, that a friend of mine started using. He worked in the visual effects industry and film. So these people, they live in dark rooms, they work 12 to 16 hours a day, they're going to make it through a shift, they're going to be really cognizant about what they're doing, they're going to make smart choices, they're going to be awake, aware, and really, you know, problem solve on a daily basis. And he said, oh, I've been taking these pills and it's rocket fuel and whatever. I'm like, okay. He said it gives you crazy dreams, which is sort of a bit of a side effect of some of these things, very lucid dreaming, which can also be super fun as well. And it's quite therapeutic. And you know, I tried it and I was like, whoa. And then I literally had one of the most lucid dreams that I'd had in a long time, like with literal spiders falling onto my face. And I had enough. It was just
that does not sound great.
No, and about 2-3 years later, I connected with Ann Shin and her teams over at Fathom Films to do this smart drugs project, and they were like, "Hey, we're looking for a biohacker in Canada." They chatted to a couple of people in Toronto. All three of them said, "You need to chat to Nick Badminton." We chatted. We made it happen. We went to San Francisco. We're in Toronto. We're in Vancouver. In between, I was flying all over the world, and I sort of took all of these smart drugs with me when I could, and sort of detailed my experiences on using them and things like cold water therapy, meeting Wim Hof and, you know, the Iceman.
I love him.
Yeah, and talking about that, and, you know, went to one of his big sort of 300-person seminars, and cold water therapy is something that I find to be incredibly useful and very helpful. Even basic exercise, meditation, things like this have become a sort of an ongoing part of my life. And, I lapse. I mean, during the pandemic, what was I doing? Was I like silently meditating and sort of trying to uplift myself with smart drugs? No, I was sort of quite anxious and quite stressed. But, recently I've sort of got back into the flow of things and sort of got back on track, right? So, yeah, it's a really interesting experiment that I've been doing on my life, and it ebbs and flows and keeps going, and I keep pushing the boundaries. And 5, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, no one would be talking about things like psychedelics and being therapeutics and being applied in those ways. People weren't talking about smart drugs as being applied as, in the workplace like they are today. Everything was underground, and today everything seems quite overground, to be honest.
Right. I mean, one of the things, to me, it seems like there's a lot of sort of self-experimentation going on. People are essentially using themselves as guinea pigs in their home labs, which presents, I think, some dangers. And, is there such a thing as too far? And, if you look at the number of smart drugs out there, there's a lot. And people, you're experimenting. You don't know if there's an interaction between one thing and another thing. And you see some people taking, 50 pills a day, which is, I think, is insane. Yeah.
Yeah, people like Kurt Swile were taking over 120 pills a day for various things, CoQ10 and Prastan, whatever, right? I'm not exactly sure what his stack was. Then you've got the DIYers, the people that don't buy off the shelf. They buy the raw ingredients and they create their own stacks. They might sell it to some people. Some of the biohackers that I met that created their own nootropic blends started off being the people that stack things up. They're sometimes known as stackers, biohackers, whatever. And these people are the ones that are really trying. There's very active communities. You go to Reddit and some other communities online, and you'll find lots of people talking about what they've tried, their regimen, what they found. All these people are just trying to find a way to optimize what it means to be human. I find the whole subculture to be very interesting. I come from a subculture before all of this, of like piercing and tattooing and industrial music and the underground in the UK. And I found that to be incredibly edgy, people hanging themselves on hooks and hanging, swinging from the rafters in rooms, and to go deeper into ritualistic sort of like piercings and brandings and whatever. And this seems to be a modern shamanic experience in a way, of looking at ways to enhance what it means to be human.
That's really interesting. And, there's a lot of promising research these days in terms of things like psilocybin, aka magic mushrooms, MDMA, and especially when it comes to performance and mental performance and also well-being. Yeah. And of course, microdosing LSD and psilocybin are a big thing in Silicon Valley, and it's trickling elsewhere as it kind of becomes a little bit more open to experimentation. And I know the FDA is looking at approving a few things to be used in a more mainstream setting. Yeah. What do you think we're going to see in that area of things?
You know what? It's really heartening to see plant medicine and even other more pharmaceuticals being approved. MDMA being a pharmaceutical, and something like DMT, something like psilocybin as being formulated from plants. So I think that it's great. I mean, we've been under the grip of big pharma. The 1980s, the Prozac generation. Well, go back 4,000 or 5,000 years and you go to the jungles of Peru. You had the ayahuasca generation, the people that lent into the mother for the wisdom of the world. People say that modern religion were born from these psychedelic experiences, DMT being one of the most powerful psychedelics out there, if not the most powerful. And it's created by our pineal gland, the third eye. Sometimes we talk about the third eye, and it's released when we're born, and it's released when we're dead, and it releases very, very, very tiny amounts throughout our lives. And some say that it contributes to dreaming and whatever. But some people jack it up and they go on, 2-3 month retreats to the jungles of Peru or Mexico or whatever. People look at peyote and all these things. And And I don't think he would have seen the legitimacy if it hadn't been for some of sort of the alternative media bringing it to the front over the past sort of 10 years or so. People really taking big chances to go and look for solutions for their problems in life beyond the doctor and beyond pharmaceuticals. And I think it's incredibly brave. And you know what, this is how communities used to bind together. This is how, you know, shaman and people that with shamanic training used to be really valuable in society. And, you know, we've lost a lot of that because the industrial complex, which has been shown to be very fragile based on what's been happening with the pandemic, has sort of replaced everything with consumable products, right? 2 for 1, you know, buy 3 packets for $100 or whatever, right?
Right.
Whereas we can go and find the truth out there in nature. And, you know, there's been underground movements of psychotherapists that have been applying things like MDMA and things like psilocybin in the underground, probably for a good 20 years, to try and address problems around addiction, problems around depression, problems around suicidal thoughts and whatever. And even terminal patients. I mean, there's some studies that were done out of New York City about 4 or 5 years ago where they were using psilocybin with therapists for terminal cancer patients, and literally would take them and help them face, you know, stare into the face of death and not be afraid of what's to come, because, you know, their ego and fear and anxiety had been broken away by the beautiful experience delivered by the plant medicine.
It seems like these things, they provide sort of a spiritual medicine as opposed to just traditional pharmaceuticals are really about this sort of clinical approach to human being, whereas we're not just these clinical entities, right?
Yeah, it's the difference between better living through chemistry and better living through insight and spirituality, right?
Right.
I don't think we'll ever be able to separate, you know, the ideas of, you know, those plant-based medicines and even those very powerful and beautiful pharmaceuticals that can be applied in new ways, you know, MDMA and ketamine, whatever. These new ways of being applied are just gonna be powerful, but they cannot be separated from the therapy that needs to go with it. It's the journey. You can't do that on your own. The people that have tried to do things on their own, I knew someone that did ayahuasca, and it was a shamanic experience. And ayahuasca sometimes is explained to people as, you know, all of your life is unpacked in front of you. You can see every part that's good and every part that's bad. And then you have to carry that with you until you can work out how to reassemble those pieces in the right way, what to get rid of, what to work through and whatever. And it can take years. I've had people literally, you know, do one weekend and disappear off. Now, I actually think that if they were to do it in a context where maybe there was shamanic practice and therapeutic practice as well afterwards, that could be incredibly powerful. So I think we're reaching an enlightened phase of humanity in medicine right now to think differently. And going back to nootropics and smart drugs and whatever, I mean, this is just, you know, this is like supercharging the body and the mind to do more as well. But, you know, even the movements around food being medicine and fasting and all of that.
Right.
You know, people are really trying to get on top of what it means to be trapped in this, you know, this body of flesh.
You know, I think sometimes these things that we're trying to use in order to improve ourselves and optimize themselves are driven by this society where we have this extreme pressure to perform.
Yeah.
Do you think we are meant to be these superhumans who are constantly activated? And, you know, is there such a thing as like too far for our humanity?
Yeah, you know, it's like, if you're an evolved human, what does it really mean? Is someone with $1 billion with 5 houses around the world that drives a Lamborghini more evolved than someone that rides a bicycle and lives in 500 square feet with minimal possessions? I mean, the vast range of evolution all comes down to one thing, you know, we're beautiful human souls. So it's the work that we have to do. And regardless of the work that you do and whether that's got a purpose or you do it for money or you do it for fun, it all comes back down to the raw particles that make us up. We're parts in the universe. And so it's really difficult to know, who's better off and who's worse off, and whether we're doing good at this. But, one of the biggest things that I've realized over probably the last 15 plus years of biohacking is that, the mind is fragile, and it's equal amongst beings and amongst humans. And when we do the work, and when we start to think about what we can be and remove all barriers, then we can be whatever we want to be. And I've had therapy for PTSD. I did tapping therapy, and it fixed a bunch of trauma in my life. And my potential was just released, and it wasn't about earning money. It was about doing some cool stuff and whatever. And here I am today, like running a really successful foresight business, working with the biggest clients in the world, flying all over the world, working with everyone from the United Nations to NASA to central banks and whoever, right? The biggest tech companies in the world. And it's like a dream, but it wasn't until I healed the trauma could I actually realize that potential. And I think the one thing that biohacking has shown me, and the therapy that I've done, and breath work is incredibly powerful, probably the most powerful thing that I've done, to do this sort of holotropic breathing for several hours. It's incredible. You tap into multiple generations of insight.
So in terms of, most of us, we take some supplements like vitamin D and omega-3, but biohacking is still kind of fringe. Most people don't necessarily do it or know about it even. Maybe they know a little bit. Where do you think we are heading with it into the future? Do you think it's going to be a lot more mainstream?
Yeah, a lot. It's a multi-$100 billion industry. Supplements and vitamins, nootropic smart drugs are just going to slip in there nice and easily. L-theanine, things like some of the things are already in there. Some of the more highly charged products, they're on the shelves of the organic stores already. Are they going to come into like big box supermarkets? Walmart, is Walmart going to sell these products? I guess that they already have in some way as well, especially online. So it's all over Amazon, it's all over the shelf. So I think that it is mainstream. I just think that people are very wary about it, but also people don't know about it. So things like this podcast help to really bring awareness. I think you can go to the Reddit Nootropics forum. You could learn a lot in there. Psychedelics forum, you can learn a lot in there. You can look in, health forums and blogs, and it's everywhere. If you type in biohacking, you're going to have a depth of experience that you can sort of learn from. And the last 5 to 10 years, everything from, technology implanted in bodies all the way through to supplements and smart drugs have been explored. And I think that all of this body of knowledge is leading us into a world where, medical professionals are bringing it on as something that's incredibly valid.
Right. And, I think especially now that we're able to easily perform also DNA tests, so we know we can maybe customize even just the drugs that we're taking, same with supplements. It does offer such a great opportunity because not everything is meant for everyone. As we can see on these Reddit forums, something that works for one person doesn't work at all for someone else. I know for me, I've got kind of an unusual system, so actually almost nothing works for me.
The
nootropic side of things, and but if I'm able to kind of hone in and really understand how I process things, for example, caffeine, which is the most popular nootropic that everyone consumes, most people consume on an everyday basis anyways. For me, I'm a really fast metabolizer of caffeine, which is why I don't feel it. And everyone, some people are very slow metabolizers, so they actually should consume less caffeine. And being able to optimize these things by knowing more about yourself, I think is very promising.
Yeah, I'm like a caffeine freak, right? I limit the amount of caffeine I drink. I drink yerba mate now, which is highly caffeinated. It doesn't have a crash. This is what all biohackers say. I drink my mate, but it does. It's like I'm on fire for a while, and
I have no crash, but I also have no fire. So it's very sad. I like coffee because I love the taste of it. Yeah. It's a pleasant experience for me, but I'm not somebody who's like, I need to have my cup of coffee because it doesn't doesn't do anything for me.
Yeah. And do you know what? I think I find, from the stories and the people I've met, there's a lot of women who do not react to it in any way versus guys. It seems like us guys can take one thing and suddenly we're away to the races. And there's some women, it's like, I've actually had a number of friends that have gone to do shamanic rituals using plant-based medicines. And they go, yeah, I sat there for 8 hours and nothing happened. Meanwhile, like the rest of the room is on fire.
Yeah, that would be me probably. Nothing happens. Yeah. It's funny.
But things like breath work works for everyone because it's using something within the body. And I think that, to your point, I think it fits to the individual a little bit more rather than bringing an external sort of factor into the situation.
I love the Wim Hof stuff because that's natural. It's air. You're not doing any harm to yourself, and it's cold exposure, which I haven't quite mastered. I got better at it, and then I didn't do it, and then I couldn't go back. But the breath, I mean, nothing bad. It's a natural thing in a good way, and it's a tool, for people.
Yeah, holotropic breath work. Let me touch on this. This is the most powerful thing, and it helps you really go into healing, and it helps people regress through memory and everything. And I did something that's called the work, and it's with a rather fabulous woman in Vancouver called Gila Golub, and her and hundreds of people do this, and we meet every week, and there's lots of amazing experiences, and it's about using psychological theory, using exercises. Breath work is one of the most powerful things there. There's also something called Psych K, which I'll talk on in a little minute. So breath work, you're there in a room, you're partnered up to make sure that you're safe, and you start breathing. And when you close your eyes, you start breathing. At the same time, they start very, very loud drumming. Typically tribal drumming, and it's insane. It's incredibly loud. It's very uncomfortable. She sort of lives away from a lot of other people, so she can do this. But you're in a room with about 20 other people, and you go through for 3 hours, and you just literally like 3 hours, and you don't think you can do it.
Not easy.
After about 15, 20 minutes, you start lifting up, and my experience was I stood up, and I started to dance and started to move, and I started, and by the end of the 3 hours, I tapped into 1,000 generations that had gone before me that were like reaffirming a bunch of stuff and challenging me on a bunch of stuff. And when it switched over, my partner was doing it. He was having some challenging times and processing things. There were people in the corner that were 3 generations beyond Holocaust survivors that were processing their grandparents' memories. And it's wild to think of the epigenetics and the genetics that can pass memories down, from grandmother to mother to daughter, how we can disrupt that and whatever. And breath work has been incredible.
I've only done an hour of breath work, and that was intense.
Yeah, I think later this year, if possible, I'm going to do it's going to be a week where you do breath work every day, and you mix that up with other work that you do with this group. Pretty intense stuff, right? But if you there's something else I use called Psych K, and Psych K, what that does is it taps into your subconscious thoughts and helps to reprogram them through natural language neuro-linguistic processing. And it's so fascinating that you can really challenge your belief systems and really get to the heart of what's causing that anxiety in your life, and you can let this go. And these natural methods just need good practitioners and good support, and we can realize anything and relieve ourselves from the trauma that we've been passed down from our parents, right, and their parents.
Now, looking into more unnatural ways of modifying things, so things like gene modification and editing, that's a real possibility in the kind of relatively near future even. So we can pick out our eye color, improve memory and learning, remove genes that may cause certain diseases. But do you think that we're also in a way removing what makes us human? Because sometimes our weaknesses are actually our strengths, or turn out to be our strengths. People always use the example of, great, like back. Oh my gosh, I can't pronounce things today. But the great composer, whose name I cannot pronounce for some reason, being deaf and still able to create this music, or overcoming, I'm thinking of the movie Gattaca, where, what do you think about that?
Yeah, Gattaca is one of my favorite movies. It's like an ethical workout for the brain. How far do you go to create the perfect human? I'm going to become a father, and like myself and my partner have we've left it to nature. Like, if you use Gattaca type terms, would we have sat down and would we have been like, okay, we want this kid to have blue eyes, be 6'6", blah blah blah, checklist, above natural intelligence, all good. Well, we're taking a chance on that. I'm tall. We're both fairly smart individuals. We'll bring that kid up because nurture is more important than nature in a lot of cases, as well, as we found. And
But would you have done it?
Would I have done it? No, I don't think so. I think if it got to the point where we went through a number of tests, right? You go through tests and you see if your child's going to have Down syndrome. You see if there's a number of other things, and you make sure that everything's okay from some of those congenital problems. If it was about, yes, your kid's great, congenital heart defects are in your family, or there's this particular condition that's genetic and you can't have kids because if you do, then the likelihood of them having this gene or that gene, or I've had friends that have had double mastectomies at the age of 30 years old because their fathers have had breast cancer and died at the age of 50. It's like, these are the things that you can disrupt with that kind of genetic therapy and editing. And I think that in those cases, it can be interesting. I mean, there was a case study, I think a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago, of 3 people came together and 3 people provided the genetic information and to create an embryo for a baby that didn't have this congenital defect. I don't know exactly what it was, but it's interesting as we play in this theater. Is it unnatural? Is it unholy? Is it against human ethical boundaries? Well, all of these things are being really debated and worked out. There was someone in China, a researcher in China, that said that he produced genetically modified humans. That's incredibly dangerous to push those boundaries. So we do have to be careful. I'm not an expert in genetics. I'm just interested in the ethical gymnastics that comes with thinking about challenging these boundaries and what's going to be responsible as a human, as a researcher, and as a parent as well.
Right. Yeah. I mean, those are difficult questions because it's one thing, heart failure or cancer versus, say, autism, and that's not an easy thing to answer. Do you think we're going to be able to upload our brains in the future and live forever? And would you do it?
Who wants to live forever, right? I mean,
some people do.
I wax lyrical on this. Do you really want to live forever? I mean, there's all these people, the bros down in Silicon Valley, the exponential bros that take all these supplements and gene therapies and whatever. And you know what? I want to live until I'm 200 years old. People like Aubrey de Grey is an amazing guy that, treats, death like a disease and aging like a disease, moreover, death than a disease. It's interesting because aging can cause huge amounts of problems. Could we live forever? Is that a good idea? You know what? I start playing with the ideas of, like, think of some of the greatest brains in the world, like Ada Lovelace that did some of the first computer programming, Einstein, you Marie Curie, all the way through to Stephen Hawking, right? All these people were taken from us through various ways and diseases and just
sometimes early, right?
Yeah, and sometimes early, right? I mean, Marie Curie died because of her research. But like, her research has saved millions and millions of lives. It's incredible, right? These are not martyrs. These are true heroes of the human race. What would have been the benefit of keeping them alive forever, or having the way,
like in those jars in Futurama?
Exactly. That's exactly what I talk about. I use that as an example for this exact discussion. Can you imagine if suddenly you had a room with some of the, the greatest thinkers, strategists, chemists, scientists, theologians, or whatever, people like Al-Jazari, the dreamer in 12th century, in the 12th century in Persia, were designing automata. You had Leonardo da Vinci. People like, imagine if we had them all in a room that could process information together. That's pretty incredible, right?
Imagine them also being AI and all connected into one person.
Well, exactly, right? And now we're really getting into dystopian futures, right? The dark futures. But it's interesting. Would we keep people alive forever? You know what? I think that we are a long, long way away. There's hundreds of millions of VC dollars going towards trying to work out downloading the human consciousness and uploading it into a form so it can keep living, and we're still struggling to really define what human consciousness is.
I was about to say that, yeah.
And that's the problem. There was a really interesting experiment. There was a woman who's I think it was her best friend. She uploaded all of his emails and writings and I think social media accounts, and it created a personality. I think that there was some Black Mirror-esque kind of episodes that came out of this with Dom Hall Gleason, where suddenly this woman's husband died and she could upload, she could connect it to all of his accounts and upload an assembly of his personality into a body that looked like him. and it's interesting, right? That it's still not that person. It's a psychological uncanny valley. It would kind of feel like that person, but there'd be enough that was different that it made make you feel a bit creepy,
Right. How do you think people should prepare for the future, and can we prepare for the future? Can we be future proof?
Yeah, we can't be future proof, but we can ask the right question. So, back in your introduction, you talked about how I talk about going from a mindset of what is to what if. If we can ask questions every day and be open and creative with thinking about how our world could work, the world would be a lot better place. And anyone that does that is basically a futurist. There's one thing in common about all humans in the world. We all think of the future, whether we're thinking about what we're going to eat for dinner that night, what our plans are next week, or people like me that it's like 5, 10, 20 years, sometimes 200 years into the future. What's the world going to be like? But if we can wake up and just say, no, what if we redesign the streets around us for humans versus cars? What if I put that plant in the corner of the room, and what would that do for my life visually and from the oxygenation of the air in the room? What if I change the stimulus that I use? What if, I get up and I run 25 miles or cycle 100K? What if we apply technologies in new ways? What if, fossil fuels and oil and gas and even nuclear disappeared and we could have abundant energy in the world? What if there's no value in the energy and it's all in utilities? What if China becomes the biggest superpower in the world by 2030? All these things really elicit huge conversations about how the world could change. And, in the UK, we used to call these pub conversations a lot of the time. But people have this. Yeah, absolutely. Well, sometimes, people in the pub, they never play pub quizzes against the people that stay in the pub all the time. They know far too much. There's smart people out there. But, the conversations are happening in the halls of government, in the United Nations World Economic Forum, in the bar around the corner, around dining tables and on podcasts like this. And that's what we can do. Future proofing is about really understanding an awareness of who we are today. We talked about biohacking all the way through that. That helps us, that augments us to be able to do more. If we can really get a grip on who we are today, and we can understand that change is the only constant in our life, and embrace that and be creative about how we can shape the world versus the world being dictated to us by, people that provide products or systems or ways of working. And we can bring it back down to the brass tacks of us being humans, and that we're connected and we're loving and we're beautiful human souls, then we are future-proofing the world. But you know what? We've still got a long way to go, because that kind of consciousness is really difficult to come by in every single person that you touch base with.
Definitely is. But a direction to head in is to keep asking.
Yeah, I keep striving myself, and every day is not a good day, but like, you know, some days are fantastic, and you know, more of those that can happen, the better.
And the more I think you know about the past too and the present, it informs, you can make those predictions about the future too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Last question for you. So what are you personally most excited about in terms of the future? It could be innovation, tech, or just a different approach towards things.
If you would have asked me 5 years ago, I would have been like, the opportunities with exponential technologies and artificial intelligence and data and, you know, robotics and transhumanism and, you know, equality being enabled by that and whatever. And today it's a very different answer. And you'll find this with people that do go deep into researching this subject is, once you peel back the onion, the only one left in the middle of the room is you. You don't have any devices. You don't have these computers. You don't have anyone to talk to. All you've got is yourself. And, you know, the greatest tool for the future is you, your awareness, your concentration, and your compassion for everyone else in the human race. So that's what I think on that particular subject. It sounds rather lofty, and I'm still practicing, and it can sound a little bit alternative as thinking. But, you know, maybe some of these crazy thinkers have got it right, you know?
Right. So not a specific thing per se that you're...
It's everything, right? It's everyone and everything. Take a deep breath in and breathe out. Keep pushing.
Fair enough. And how can people find you online?
So nikolasbadminton.com. If you type my name into Google, I'm all over the place. Lots of different articles for publications, everything from like Vice to BBC, Huffington Post, TechCrunch. I was in the Boston Globe earlier this week. I do a lot of video work. There's over 250 videos on YouTube of me. I do lots of vlogging. I do lots of the Exponential Minds podcast. You can find that on Spotify, on Anchor. You can find that on SoundCloud. You know, I chat to interesting people every week, including yourself. I run interesting events. Dark Futures will happen this November, December in Toronto, I'm hoping. Next year, we're going to be starting Future Camp, and I've got some exciting projects that are going to be coming up soon, and hope to talk to you about them.
Sounds great. I love, I want to go to Future Camp. That sounds really great.
Yeah.
Okay.
More on that soon.
Great. Thank you so much for joining me, Nikolas.